Hi, I'm Daniel, and this is painting a Golden Demon entry in a couple of hours. You may remember my recent video in which I discussed my chances of getting an entry ready for Golden Demon at Warhammer Fest 2023, which took place this past weekend in Manchester. In this video, I'll show you some footage of me painting up and composing my entry, which I started at 8 PM on the Thursday night before the event. After my last video, you'd be forgiven for assuming I was going to skip this year's competition and return or pass on my ticket to another hobbyist. However, after I received a couple of encouraging messages from Modelling for Advantage and Steve at Who Took My Dice, and a half-hearted attempt to pass the ticket on to Hattie from Midwinter Minis, it got to Thursday and I decided I was going with a conversion idea that I'd been mulling over for a while, a truly dynamic distraction grot. I'd always envisaged having them mounted on a street light on a 25mm base, but as this didn't have to be a usable gaming piece, I had the chance to go a little more elaborate. The miniature at the centre of the piece was one I'd stashed in my bits box when I originally got my hands on the custom booster blaster, this being the incredibly dynamic grot clinging to the back of the vehicle, taking pot shots with a grot blaster. And because I was originally going to use this as a distraction grot in a 100% kit bash kill team, instead of a grot blaster I needed a grappling gun. For the pieces I needed, I turned to another kill team kit, the starter set from the previous edition of the game that came with the Tailfire Warriors facing off against Primaris Reavers. It was of course the Reaver side of the box that I pillaged for the fired grapnel launcher parts. To attach the cable to the blaster, I first drilled a hole in the barrel using a 0.8mm bit in my pin vise, lined up the part and increased the size in 0.2mm increments until I found the correct size for the uncoiling cable to fit. I believe I ended up with a 1.2mm bit, but don't quote me on that. To secure the cable in place and fill any unsightly gaps, I covered the end of the cable in sprue goo. Before I speed through the painting process, I want to share some initial thoughts about Warhammer Fest. I may do another video in the future going into greater detail on how I think it could be improved, but for now, I'll be giving you this. It was underwhelming. There was so little free hobby stuff to do, and I was there for 3 days. A £40 weekend pass, or £140 in the case of the premium ticket holders, essentially got you access to the venue, a free scavenger hunt, which you needed to download an app for, and you could join an hours-long queue to paint a Space Marine or Stormcast miniature. Now that's something you can do in literally any store in the country. Your other free options were to play a battle round of 10th edition Warhammer 40k. On the first day, I dread to think how long you had to queue for, but it was a while. We waited until the third day, and after queuing to get into the venue before it opened, we still stood for over an hour to get to play a single game turn of the new edition. I've got zero hate to direct at the staff running the tables, by the way. They were their usual engaging selves, and to keep that up for 3 days, game after game, with very few breaks is super impressive. We had Simon from Warhammer Plus walking us through the rules, and it was actually his birthday, so again, happy birthday Simon, and I hope you had a great day and weekend overall. The final free hobby activity was essentially looking at stuff. You could go and look at the Golden Demon cabinets, the only problem being the dawdlers, lingering like a bad fart in front of each cabinet for far too long. I get that there was little else to do, but keep the lines moving, guys. Let everyone have a look. And that brings us nicely back to my miniature, which people were queuing up to look at. I had to barge through literally wands of people to get a picture. How did I get it looking so good though? Well, I started with the orkiest of colours, Magos Purple, initially blasting it through an airbrush to all those fleshy areas, toe beans, ears, nose, belly and buns. I then shot some achromatic blue into any areas that might have shadows cast on them, basically the recesses and undersides of any areas that I wanted to look slightly greener and more shaded. The next colour is one of my favourite contrast paints, Plaguebearer Flesh. It's a very yellowy green, so when going over a light blue, it filters it to look like a deeper green. And on the higher areas, it'll look like a yellowish highlight with minimal effort. All the time saved with the airbrush getting those base colours down meant I had more time to go in with the hand brush and work on those blends, reaffirming the warm areas of the grot's flesh. I also used the hand brush to paint the grappling gun, base coating it in Black Legion, dry brushing it with Lead Belcher, and edge highlighting those top areas to the front of the miniature with Mithril Silver. Now that's a throwback to the 90s. I broke up the silver metallics on the gun by glazing some snakebite leather over them, introducing a second metal into it. But the cable and the trousers on the grot are base coated in Basilicanum Grey and allowed the paint to do all the shading work on the cable. I used a little dawnstone to highlight the thighs on the trousers, but glazed a contrast grey over the top once again, as I felt the transition was a little too harsh. For the eyes I used some Blood Angels red, and the nails I used my usual Talisar blue over the Plague Bearer, giving me that lovely greeny blue tone I like on my Orcoid claws. The last little bit of time I had, I spent adding some texture to the trousers. I wanted them to look a little worn and slightly threadbare. I chose my favourite light grey for this, thinning down some Celestial Grey and applied it with the brush I own with the finest tip, my Winsor & Newton Series 7 size 1. These are expensive brushes, but when they enable you to paint lines as fine as they do, it's well worth splashing out now and then in my opinion. And that was it, my mini was done in under 5 hours. When you consider the other painters spent upwards of 300 hours on theirs, I'm absolutely delighted to have ended up with a finalist pin. Lucky beyond belief. There were entries in the competition overall that didn't get a finalist pin, but their level of painting was streaks ahead of mine. Why is that? I don't actually have a solid answer, but I can tell you what I think it is. I simply play to my strengths. I've been painting green flesh with variations on this recipe for over 2 years now, so I knew I wanted to paint a greenskin of some sort. I also like telling stories. I had a narrative in mind when I was putting this piece together. Everything about it should imply height. I didn't choose my tallest plinth by accident. With the clouds at the bottom of the stack, I was hoping the judges would be able to tell that this grot had climbed far above the battlefield in order to escape. There's a look of grim determination on his face, but in my mind that's just because he's taking aim as he leaps closer to the target. This isn't really a distraction grot, it's an extraction grot, doing his best to get to the copter. I also used mainly contrast paints, because they're the paints I'm happiest working with. I like the way they leave the brush and move over the model. And finally, in my most cynical move, I entered a category that I thought would have fewer entries. Open's a weird category. You can face off against busts that people have made from scratch, painting legends that can't enter other categories because they happen to still work for Games Workshop, such as Darren Latham, or your very own hobby heroes who you aspire to be as cool as. They've used the category to pull off the ultimate flex of painting up the finalist pin they won the previous year. I'm looking at you, Louise.
Flex of the week!
Ultimately, all you can do is maximise your own chances, so if you're after a pin or some other reward, then stick to what you're good at. If you want to win Slayer Sword, chances are that's going to be a lifetime of improving your painting. If you get enjoyment from that kind of goal to drive towards, then what are you waiting for? Get to work! Enjoyment should be your ultimate goal in this hobby. My enjoyment comes from getting an idea, developing it, and slowly seeing a piece come together. So find the fun where you can, and until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield.